Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first up is the Finance Department. Director Riebling, if you would, please introduce who you have brought with you, even though we all know who they are, and begin your budget presentation to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman McGuire and members of the committee, members of the council. We appreciate this opportunity. We know it's I'm sorry. There we go. We on now? I'm sorry. Chairman McGuire, members of the committee, we appreciate this opportunity to speak here on the Finance Department. We know it's been a very long week already for members of the council. I want you to know we are happy to answer any questions. I don't have much to say. We obviously, it probably goes without saying, is that we are comfortable with the budget that's been presented by the mayor for the Finance Department. With me is the two deputy directors of the department, Gene Nolan, who's now in his, this is his 39th budget that he's worked on behalf of the Metropolitan Government, and the other deputy director, Talia Lomax O'Neill. Just for question purposes, Talia obviously works on the budget, more on the budget operations. Gene is who the Finance Department really relies on for a lot of things, history, but most importantly, revenue estimates and sort of seeing where we're going. You know, we really are comfortable with where we are. We think the department has made a lot of progress over the last few years. But for the sake of time, I'd really like to turn it over to the committee for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Director Riebling. Councilman Stein, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Riebling, I think there's universal support here for the transfer of the tax collection functions from the county clerk's office to you all. I assume that you all plans are being made for how to assume that and how that transition will go smoothly, and how all that will function. Can you just give us some outline of how all that works?
Right. Sure, Councilman, and they are going. We're making some progress. That operation will be transferred under the Treasurer's office. Lanny Holland is the city treasurer, and his office will coordinate that. He has already brought a staff person on board to help with the transition. This is a woman who has worked in the clerk's office in the past, moved out of town, and can't move back to Nashville, so she has some history with the office. There have been I know that Mr. Holland has had at least one meeting with the clerk, with Mr. Areola, and several others with representatives of his staff. And so steps are already underway. And so that, assuming council action on third reading, we think it'll be a pretty smooth transition and we'll be up and running on July 1st.
And one additional question about another part of the budget that is not yours, but it was raised in the public hearing by a really uninformed member of the public who was very critical of the internal audit function without a recognition that I believe that, I don't know what year that charter amendment was to create the internal auditor,
5 or 6,
but
yeah.
People actually voted on that and created that, and it was actually an effort to increase accountability within our government. But I would be curious from your perspective, as obviously you see all of those audits, you're part of that. If you could just outline for us and the world the importance of that function and how it operates within the government.
Right.
Thank you.
Members of the council, as you know, the voters selected to amend the charter several years ago to create an independent office of the internal auditor. Historically, that office had been a part of the Finance Department. And I think that the voters, and I think in a good way, felt it was important to have that separate from and outside the scope of the normal operations of any function of government. And so 2 members of the council, the vice mayor, myself, and 2 appointed officials serve on the audit committee. I asked Mr. Swan, the internal auditor, today. I wanted to make sure he had seen that. I sent him an email asking for some information on something, and he said he had been watching, and so he was aware that at least some were trying to do away with his office, which he thought was sort of surprising since the voters had just voted in the office. I think it's functioning really pretty well. It is, as I said, an independent office, but with the oversight of the board. They've done a number of reports and I think made some improvements. Some of them involving the clerk's operations for one, and I found them to be responsive. And when there's a need, they can drop their other work and pick up, sort of a crisis situation that needs to be done. So, from our perspective, we feel like it's been a very well-run office and an efficient operation. and has been constructive to the betterment of metropolitan government.
Councilman Tigard, you're recognized.
Thank you. Rich, follow-up to Councilman Stein's question about the transfer over of the tax collections. What happens to the personnel at the county clerk's office that were performing or supposedly performing that function?
Well, as you know, we have proposed in the budget that about $157,000 would be transferred from the clerk's operation to the finance department to cover the personnel cost. Once we sort of identify what will be needed by, in terms of if we need to add another position, obviously any individual can apply for that position, but it would be, at this point, it would be sort of something for the clerk to handle how he's going to administratively operate his office.
But you may or may not bring those people over as is in the same function.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm sure we asked this question last year, but refresh my memory. Your line item on professional and purchase services went 2 years ago, 7,600 to 79,100, down a little bit this year to 76,400. What are the professional and purchase services that you all do?
The largest number in there is some consulting money that was given to the Office of Business Assistance last year for consulting fees for the non-discrimination testing.
Part of the procurement non-discrimination ordinance that requires an update to the benchmark study, and that's what that money is primarily used for.
Is that through grants, or is that a line, or just an allocation from the general fund?
General fund allocation.
And why was it so low 2 years ago? We weren't doing that previously?
Correct.
And this is required or necessary or
Yes.
absolutely essential?
Absolutely essential.
Right now, we're required to update that benchmark study on an annual basis. We are planning to bring legislation that would make that a not semi-annually, but every 2 years, whatever that word is, basis. The consultants, whose name escapes me right now, think that by the time you do 1 year, it's sort of old, it just doesn't give you enough time to react. And so they're going to look for a 2 years, so that'll go on a cycle, assuming the council supports that. The ordinance requires an annual update now, and so what we're going to do is ask to amend the ordinance to go to a 2-year cycle.
And the council passed this ordinance?
The council passed the procurement non-discrimination ordinance. Yes, sir.
Okay.
In,
But
2000.
was this mandated by state or federal, or
No.
it's something we wanted to do?
It was something we did on our own. I think we had been a long history of discussions of how to better monitor and capture minority business opportunities in the city, and the legal department, purchasing, and the rest of the finance office came up with this idea back in 2000, I guess it was 2008 when it was adopted, for the procurement non-discrimination. There was a way to make sure that minorities and small business were given ample opportunity to serve.
Thank you.
the city.
Councilman Glover, you're recognized.
Director Riebling, question for you. If we look at the debt service and the payment that will, not in the current budget, but as we look forward, are the numbers that are shown there, are they accurate, or are they subject to change going forward?
Well, they're accurate. I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but they would be the current debt service schedules. We continually look at ways to lower debt service. Actually have a call tomorrow looking at a way to refinance the debt and save $1 million a year in debt service payments. So we continually monitor our debt service to see if there's a way. As you know, interest rates remain at historically low levels. And so when there's opportunities to refinance debt and save money, we're going to, if appropriate, we reach the right level of savings, we'll bring those opportunities to the council for approval. And so we're continuing to look at that. But essentially, those are our obligations currently as they stand.
Okay, then let me rephrase the question. Is it the highest that they should be in the next couple of years that are shown in the
Debt
book?
service numbers are rising a little bit. They go up some this year, they go up a little bit next year, and they go up a little bit more in 2015, and then sort of level out at that number. But with the proposal that we have presented to the council with the rate adjustment, we think we'll have adequate money in debt service funds to meet our obligations.
All right, thank you.
Council Lady Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman McGuire. At the risk of prolonging the school's budget hearing, which went on, I think, a record 5 hours last night.
Did I get a new appointment that I didn't know about?
The purchasing department came up, and Rich, you were there for this, and Talia, I don't know if you were there, and Jean. And what I'm about to ask is not a policy question, whether you think there should be more or less autonomy at schools when it comes to purchasing, schools being one of the many departments of the city government. The question came up about, they were trying to comply with, I guess, some federal problems that they had with grant record keeping. Am I characterizing that properly?
I believe that's what Mr.
Okay. And I noted that the purchasing budget at schools had gone up about 125% in the last 5 years, which of course is a red flag, and for me anyway. And one of the things that I think everybody in council and you too try to avoid is duplication of activities within our government to serve our taxpayers. So without getting into the policy question of whether we should or should not have more autonomy over there or not, does the purchasing department, which let me just say is, I think, one of your finer departments in finance. I enjoy working with everybody in finance, but I have a lot of respect for Jeff and his team, and that's not just because I represent some of them. But do they have the capacity, the expertise to, if something were to happen at schools, and they could no longer perform the function of purchasing, to handle purchasing for schools and comply with those federal directives?
Well, as you know, Council Lady, purchasing, there was a cooperative effort to consolidate purchasing, as you said yesterday correctly, goes all the way back to the Fulton administration days when that was done. I think in purchasing, schools felt beginning a few years ago that they were not getting the level of service that they needed to meet their needs. And I think that was, in some ways, at a time in which purchasing was evolving into some changes. There had been a little turnover in the department. There was some older members who were nearing retirement, and there was, I think, let me say that I think the department has gotten better and stronger over the last 2 or 3 years with some additional personnel, hiring, I think, another new key member of the team in the next few weeks to even beef it up more. So I think the capabilities at Metro Purchasing are better now than they were a couple of years ago when the change was made and schools decided to take over more of their purchasing functions. Obviously, if the schools wanted to do it, we would work out a plan and would continue to do it, but it's sort of up to schools as to whether they want to come back under the Metro Purchasing or have their own. But obviously, if that was the plan, we would be more than willing to coordinate that and make sure it happens properly.
And you think that we could meet whatever federal requirements that schools is under federal directives?
Yeah, we would obviously endeavor to do that. I would think we could do that. I don't know why we couldn't do that.
Okay, all right, that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Lady. I don't have any other members in my queue at this time, so if there are no further questions, Director Riebling, we sure appreciate you being here.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to the rest of the evening.